You might have figured out I'm not Mark. Mark had to go out of town, so I am standing in with Mark and hope to do a respectable job. We will focus on some individual plants, but I think there's also plenty of room to talk about the concept of a flowering lawn and you know, how it has prevailed here. This is a concept. Well, Mark saw flowering lawns in other parts of the country and the world on his many travels. This was a project that was funded by a very generous member of the Arboretum community. It was installed in October of 2018. That makes it, you know, about 2.5 years old. It's always odd to focus on a garden on, you know, 1 hour program, because there's a long succession of bloom in this garden. There's not a long period of time, if at all, when there isn't something blooming in this garden. There's certainly a lot of fall, winter, and spring blooming bulbs that are now dormant. You wouldn't even know they were here, except that you might, if you saw it in February or so, it was filled with the smallest of daffodils and little crocus and many other bulbs. So this is an alternative to a standard lawn, a mowed lawn. Is it lower maintenance than a lawn? I would say not. I would say it's a different kind of maintenance. You might be like me in that you know, I regret every minute I spend mowing. I'd much rather be on my hands and knees weeding a garden like this. If you're a gardener, well, I love to weed, and many gardeners do. So this could be an alternative to a lawn, and certainly much more interesting and much more varied than your typical pure grass lawn. As we look at specific plants today, you will notice some pollinator activity. I've certainly seen some bumblebees or some of the big carpenter bees. I don't know my native bees very well at all, but some of them look just like bumblebees but are much bigger. Certainly the highlight for many months in the summer are the various hardy ice plants, and nowadays there are so many ice plants available that are good hardy perennials for us. Some of the ice plants were introduced by the Denver Botanic Garden. If you think of what kind of winter they have a much colder winter than here, so winter hardiness is often not a problem with these ice plants. And even this year, there are 4 or 5 brand new ice plant cultivars on trial in the Ralston Arboretum color trials, the annual and perennial color trials. And that, of course, is our local train. I'm going to step into the flowering lawn at times. Some of these very low-growing plants are sold as steppables or as plants you can step on, but I don't recommend that for most of these. Some things like the ice plants would soon be a mushy mess if you walked across them, but I will, as carefully as possible, try to step into the garden. Here are, well, I might as well start with maybe the great-granddaddy of all the ice plants we grow. This bright fuchsia purple one is a species. The ice plants are Delosperma. I should have looked up that name. I don't know what it means other than the sperma part is referring to seed. But this is Delosperma cooperi, named for somebody named Cooper. And it was probably 40 years ago that it was, well, maybe 30 years ago that we were made aware of this plant. And it has been an unfailing performer ever since. It blooms pretty much from mid-spring up until frost. I can't think that I've ever seen it rot out in the summer. There was one other Delosperma that was introduced at the same time, a little yellow-flowered one, Delosperma nubidianum. And it only blooms once in the spring and then spends most of the rest of the summer rotting out. So the Delospermas that are good for us are really, really good performers. This is a new hybrid. This pale one is Allen's Apricot. And we have a number of other ones here. This one, we recently had to dig up a big part of this clump because some white clover found its way into there. But this little darker one is in a series. The series is Granita. Granita, I guess, is the Italian word for ice, like sherbet. And this is Granita Raspberry. It's also a really good one. But I think there may be another one or two or three more cultivars of ice plants in here. I'm standing right here by creeping phlox subulata, which is a late winter, early spring bloomer. There are various times you see out at the edge. A time, I think that's Bressingham Pink. That's a very low growing time, and it blooms for months, and the pollinators really like that one as well. One of our really star performers is this little Veronica. My feet really aren't touching the ground. I'm floating just above the plants. I'm not crushing anything, but this is a little evergreen Veronica. The leaf is quite pretty. And it's waterberry blue. It's about done blooming now, but and the flowers are smaller now than they are in the spring, but it blooms for several months up until almost early summer. I guess summer's any day now. But there's also now a white-flowered selection of it called Whitewater. But there's quite a few real low-growing Veronicas that are good choices for a low planting like this. One thing I like about the flowering lawn is a lot of these really low plants you could use in the front of a perennial border. But if they have a taller growing, robust neighbor that one day sends out a big shoot and it sits on top of that, by the time you're aware of it, you know, these real low growing plants are easily beaten up by their big neighbors in a mixed planting. So a planting where everything is low is a nice refuge for these little things. And we enjoy seeing them all year round. There are several different ajugas in the garden. This is a little one. You'll find it in garden centers under the name of chocolate chip. Nowadays, plant names are a real mess because they have both a trademark name and a cultivar name. The trademark name on this one is chocolate chip, but its real cultivar name is Valfreda. It has this tiny little dark leaf and rather nice blue flowers. Up here is a real beauty. This is black scallop, a really dark glossy leaf that has a nice sort of crinkle to it. And since I'm on the subject of ajugas, this is a real dense growing one. It's a cultivar that's been around for a long time. The leaves are real crunchy, sort of like a Savoyd spinach. And it, for most of the many decades I've known it, has gone with the cultivar name of Metallica crispa. Metallica because of the metallic shine, and crisp because it is sort of crunchy like a real fresh Savoyd spinach. I realized when I walked out here this afternoon that this planting is actually rather dry. We had some really wonderful rain, but it's been at least, I guess, a week since we had a good rain. And this soil is well drained. This little potentilla is a spring bloomer. There's still a few flowers on it, but the foliage is pretty the rest of the year. I was a little bit scared planting this because as a child, one of our worst weeds in the garden was the little potentilla that spread really fast, sort of like strawberries do with their long runners. But, you know, after almost 3 years, it's not spread terribly far. And the potentillas are also known as cinquefoil, cinc as in 5, like the Spanish cinco, and foil for foliage. And this one actually has 7 divisions, but, you know, I don't know what's typical. I think I found the one atypical leaf. No, some of these are 6 and 7, but, you know, the common name might apply better to another species of potentilla. There are some, you know, those of us who've gardened for a long time have always known ajugas with purple foliage, and then a few with variegated foliage, green foliage with white or white and burgundy. But there's a brand new series of ajugas, and the series is known as Feathered Friends. That's not the cultivar name, that's just the name of the series. And this one is paradised, and it's this. We'll see some others that are solid yellow, but this is this very intriguing yellow foliage with a lot of bronzing in the newest foliage. So a whole new color in a ajuga. So look for these. They are for sale, you know, mail order nurseries and garden centers and such. But it's nice to have this color in a shade perennial. And that brings up the point. Our original part of the flowering lawn was this sunny area where we were a moment ago. But we've sort of extended down this way where it's shady. And you can certainly do a flowering lawn in shade. And that might be even a better alternative to turf because our turf grasses want sun, whereas you could do a flowering lawn in the shade. And maybe the color is more from foliage than flowers, but there's certainly lots of low plants. You know, like some of the Veronicas want shade, and there's things like our native partridge berry, or there's also some teeny tiny hostas. Not these guys, but there's like Hosta venusta that's only a few inches tall and spreads at a modest rate. So there's lots of choices to do a planting of low-growing things. This is a Lysimachia. The Lysimachias are the loose strife. And this flowers in the spring, but this is, I think, Persian chocolate. Yeah, this is Persian chocolate, but there are 2 Lysimachias in our color trials, and one of them is one of our favorite new plants in the color trials this year. It has a bigger leaf, and it's the same sort of reddish chocolate brown leaf, but then it has mint green veining through the leaf. It's really, really pretty. I don't remember its name, but you can come out and visit it in the color trials. And maybe Chris will let me tell you if you've ever listened to me before, you know I like the derivation of names. Well, the genus is Lysimachia. The common name is loosestrife. King Lysimachos was the king of Thrace, which is an ancient name for Macedonia. He stopped a raging bull with a sprig of Lysimachia, which is where the common name comes from, lose strife. So, you know, plant names are terrifying. We all scream in horror when somebody uses a long name like Lysimachia nummularifolia, but there's often really wonderful stories behind them. I see several other plants that could be used in a shady flowering lawn. This is Mazis. We grow 2 different species of Mazis. They look identical, but one has white flowers and one has lavender flowers. And they'll tolerate a fair amount of sun if it's not dry, but they're much happier in bright shade. And this faces west, and when the sun comes around, well, and I can see it through this tree, later on in the afternoon, this end will be sunny, but it's just sunny for a few hours in late afternoon. And so the evergreen foliage, the foliage looks a lot like really tiny ajuga leaves, but a bright green. And we haven't been terribly successful with our native iris cristata. Here's a little bit of it. But that's certainly a plant that's small enough for a shady flowering lawn. You know, the maintenance in here is mostly just weeding. Now I can think of all the hours my father spent on his hands and knees digging out dandelions out of his precious lawn. You know, this probably doesn't take any more weeding than that, but you have to keep ahead of it. When plants are this low, almost any other weed's going to be taller than it. So, you know, it would be really easy for weeds to dominate in an area like this. But, you know, choose your maintenance, whether you want to be mowing the lawn once a week, or you rather go out and weed your flowering lawn and then have months and months of bloom and beautiful foliage. Do we have any questions from our members of the audience? I guess not. We can continue.
Doug, we did have a couple of questions, and I think you've already addressed one of them. Let me just get over to them real fast.
There was also some really low shrubs that could work in a flowering lawn. I'm standing right behind me is this Deutzia. Actually, we're told that you know, Deutzia is named for a German who would have pronounced his name Deutz. So this is Deutzia. And there are some really low-growing selections of Deutzia crenata, like Nico and Yuki cherry blossom, that only are about maybe 6 to 8 inches tall.
Suzanne was wondering what the soil preparation was for this bed, and what kind of amendments did you use, and how deep?
Do I need to repeat that question, or do they hear you?
I'm on the microphone.
Okay. Well, I should go back before soil prep and say that the first thing to do that's very important is try to kill any perennial weeds. You know, we could have come in here, tilled it up, and planted, and all the perennial weeds that we didn't kill would have been back in 10 days. So we didn't plant this till October, but we probably started early summer, midsummer. First, we sprayed out the lawn. This sunny area was lawn. And, you know, our lawns are, you know, usually have a high component of Bermuda grass. And you can't get rid of Bermuda grass by physically removing it. Herbicides are better because they'll be translocated into the rhizomes underground. There was also nutsedge, and you really want to make sure all the nutsedge is done. If Bobby Wilder is listening,
he is. His
partner Jack Lamb told me decades ago that Jack's father said that the only way to get rid of nutsedge was to move. So you definitely want to first kill out any perennial weeds. So we would spray and just hold off planting to give anything that was going to regrow time to regrow. So once we did that, we did do soil prep. And if I was following what I preach all the time, we would have done a soil test. You know, why add phosphorus if the soil is already rich in phosphorus? And most of the year in North Carolina, soil tests are free. And they also have always, in my 40-some years of using the North Carolina soil test lab, they're really amazingly quick in getting results back, usually within a week or so. So you won't be held up waiting for soil test results. We did incorporate permatill because I wanted to make sure the drainage was good, because we knew that things like thymes and ice plants were going to be a big component of this garden. There were some sedums we used, and I don't think that there's much of any of those sedums we use. There's probably some that would still have persisted. But so we added permatil. If people don't know permatil, it's Stay-Lite. Permatil is its full name. We use so much of it that we're on a first name basis with it, so we usually just call it permatil. It's a shale that's a waste product from something or another that's puffed at really high temperatures, so it works just like a gravel, but it's much lighter. It can be bought in most garden centers in, I don't know, 40-pound bags or something like that. And it just improves the drainage of the soil really well. This wasn't poorly drained soil to begin with, and being on the slope improves drainage anyway. So that's what we did for our soil prep. And then I can't remember now if we then mulched it with permatil. The plants spread so quickly that now this is not an area that we mulch because there's a solid carpet of plants. And my goal here at the Arboretum, one of my goals here is to see more plants and less mulch, to carpet the ground with plants. And this is a living mulch of plants here. Any other questions?
Well, there is one more question, Doug. It's from Doris, and I think it's a question that I might be better off with. Doris wants to know if there's a list of plants available on their website. And yes, Doris, we have all of our plants listed in a feature called Our Plants underneath Horticulture. And to limit down the plants in the flowering lawn, you do a search for FL1, for flowering lawn number 1, FL2, and I think there's an FL3, but I don't know how high up the numbers go, but that's how you can get a list of the different beds and what the plants are in there. Yeah,
and with our sort of extending the flowering lawn into these areas that weren't originally part of the flowering lawn, there might be a 4 and a 5, maybe 2.
I think the one that you're in right now, Doug, is still listed as SU for sunken garden.
Okay.
Yep.
And we could also just add a list of plants in the flowering lawn.
Yep.
Somewhere on the website.
And Doris, not Doris, Suzanne has a follow-up question, Doug. Yeah. She's wondering what your ratio was of the permatil to the soil, an approximate number.
Oh, we incorporated it maybe in the top 4 inches or so. These are real small plants, and their roots don't go terribly deep. So it was probably like a 25% permatil, 75% soil.
That's it for the questions.
Okay. We can continue around the corner and meet a few other plants suitable for the flowering lawn. This is the only grass that we use in the flowering lawn at this time, which doesn't mean we might not end up adding others. It's a little native grass, Aragrostis. It's Aragrostis spectabile. I bet you can figure out what spectabile means. And I see it's just starting to bloom. The foliage is about 6 inches tall, and in bloom it's maybe almost a foot tall. But the the inflorescence is very airy, so it's not like it towers over its neighbors. And when you have enough of it in bloom, it's very purple. It looks like a miniature purple muhly grass. It's a local native. You'll sometimes see this, just along the road or here or there. And it's not a long-lived grass, so these are all self-sown seedlings, so it tends to come up wherever it wants to come up. I might make another comment about the creeping phlox or moss phlox. There's so many selections nowadays in a wide range of colors, from sort of almost blue through pinks and purples and whites, solid colored ones and ones with eyes. And some of them will bloom intermittently through the winter months, and certainly by late winter, early spring, they're in full bloom. And they are a native plant. You sometimes see Phlox subulata and similar species along roadsides. And blooming real early, some of the earliest pollinators will make use of them. Okay. This plant here is, I think we talked about it much earlier in the year on a different topic, and it's a bit big for the flowering lawn, but you know, this part's not officially part of the flowering lawn, but this is this is a native wildflower. This is ragged robin, or I think it has other names. It's a, my goodness, my name, it's a rigoron. It's a composite. It's in the aster family. The inflorescence looks like a daisy. And it's Erigeron pulchellus, pulchellus meaning pretty. And in bloom, it's, you know, 12, 14, 15 inches tall. It's been done blooming for a while, but it has this evergreen foliage, and it's looking a little bit thirsty. But this one would work equally well in a shady garden. I have a friend who has a very highly shaded lawn where the grass just barely gets enough sun, but this is just beautiful in a shaded location. This is, what is the cultivar? Here's its label. Thank goodness for labels.
Is that Lynnhaven carpet? Yeah,
it's Lynnhaven carpet. Some of the wild ones have smaller flowers, but the inflorescence is about like that big. These have grown really densely, and the ajuga does too. If you needed to spread them further, just dig up part of the clump and divide them into individual rosettes and spread them out. Whenever we end up with a bare spot like this, I'm not fulfilling my job. We need to come back and fill in these blank spots. I don't want our visitors to see any blank spots. Oh, here's a little treasure. Most of the sanguisorbas that are grown as ornamentals are much larger plants. This is Sanguisorba tenuifolia, and it's not going to help me with the label, but they have little thimble-like inflorescences. This isn't something that's, you know, going to bloom. It is in full bloom now, but they're little thimbles, and they bloom for months and months. But this particular selection has these pretty little white-edged leaves. If you grow salad or culinary herbs, you grow salad burnet. Burnet is a common name for them. And they have a pinnately compound leaf like most ferns, though this isn't a fern. Do I need to come closer? No? Okay. This is a single leaf. You see it's divided like a feather, pinnae. But the little white-edged leaf, and this foliage will be pretty all summer. It's in bloom probably for about 6 weeks. And some of the bigger burnets, the bigger sanguisorbas, are tall enough that they tend to flop over, which will be my topic a week from now. So this does double duty because it's a pretty little foliage plant all through the summer months. And one of the newer ajugas, this bright yellow one, again in the Feathered Friends series. This is Cordial Canary, and you notice the tiny leaf. Well, we met the chocolate chip ajuga a few minutes ago. Well, this is a sport, a mutation of chocolate chip with a bright yellow leaf. I was really amazed when we met these, late last year or so. I didn't know they existed, and to suddenly have this bright yellow foliage on an ajuga. This is that same Lysimachia we met over there, the Persian chocolate. And the Lysimachia Persian chocolate is evergreen, so you have this purpley foliage all year round. We're going to jump to the other side of the sidewalk. you can't tell today, but I know that this is the lavender flowered mazes. Somebody came by earlier today and planted a few weeds here that weren't here earlier today, so just to make me look bad. But you see, it's a pleasant little carpet. Many gardeners assume that all geraniums want sun, but there are definitely some that prefer shade. And this is a wonderful little gently spreading geranium. It's a hybrid, Geranium X Cantabrigiensis. And there's many selections of this hybrid. This is one called Carmina with a bright, I don't know what that color is, sort of not quite lavender, sort of lavender pink flower. One of its parents is Geranium macrorhizum, which is much like this, but bigger in all aspects. But this hybrid blooms for a much longer period of time. I'm guessing it might be sterile, and because it's sterile, it's not setting seed, and because it's not setting seed, it continues to bloom, trying to set seed. But it's also evergreen, so you have this pretty foliage year-round. And having said that it's evergreen, come fall and winter, it will lose some of its foliage. And usually as it's losing foliage, it turns this wonderful red and orange color. So though most of the foliage will remain green through the winter, in the fall you have green and some of this foliage that is dying very beautifully. And, I always hate to say deer don't eat this. Well, in my experience, deer eat most geraniums, but in the same garden where deer were eating other species of hardy geraniums, they leave this one alone, and macrorhizum. Geranium macrorhizum also wants shade, and it's a little... Geranium macrorhizum might be a little bit big for a flowering lawn, but this one maybe is small enough. We have here another native wildflower, green and gold, Chrysogenum. This is a common woodland plant in this area. Some forms are clump forming and some forms are run. And there's one called Eco lacquered spider that runs extremely fast, almost to a frightening extent, but most of them are very well behaved, and they bloom for an extended period of time, months and months through the spring and summer. And it's evergreen as well. These long flowering stalks will eventually die away as it's done blooming, but the large basal rosettes will be present year-round. And earlier we saw a tiny scrap of Iris cristata. Here's a bit more, doing a bit better. Now, this is a cultivar called Powder Blue Giant. And you look at that and you think, well, that's not exactly gigantic, but it's about twice as big as your typical wild Iris cristata. The typical forms of Iris cristata are certainly small enough for a flowering lawn. And I don't know who's currently regulating flowering lawns, but I suspect if you wanted to go in with things that are 8 inches tall rather than 4 inches tall, you're probably not going to be thrown in jail or anything. So it's your garden, you can do what you want. Some of the smaller spreading epimediums would also be really good for a shady flowering lawn. And amongst them, some are evergreen, so you have year-round foliage. What else do we have? Of course, behind Alex, what's that? Well, we can. I don't know how we're doing for time. This is shorter than a tour. I don't want to.
It's up to you, Doug.
It's up to me. All right, well, let's continue all day.
You want to continue?
Oh, well, let's point out this one rare native that could be suitable for a flowering lawn. Many of you in the audience know pinkroot or Indian pink, Spigelia. I don't know the derivation of Spigelia, but I bet it's a good Italian family name, Spigelia. But the Indian pink is Spigelia marilandica, indicating it's from Maryland, though much more wider spread than that. But this is another species of Spigelia, and it's Spigelia Gentioides, meaning resembling a gentian. And they are, well, no, I actually thought they were in the gentian family, but I see they got their own family, the Spigeliaceae. But this is a federally endangered species. And like so many plants that are rare in the wild or federally endangered, they're not necessarily difficult plants in the garden. This is actually very easy in the garden. And you can buy it from like Plant Delight's nursery if you're buying it from the nursery, but you can't transport it over state lines, I believe is the case. Now, I don't know the plant very well. I don't know whether all these flowers open up at some time or whether this is like the bottled gentians where they never open, but big bumblebees will force their way into the flowers. Where's Tim when I need him? Tim would know the answer to that, or maybe Mark does, or somebody in the audience. But I suspect it would do well in shade too. The Spigelia marilandica is more typically grown in shade, but it's even better when it's grown with quite a bit of sun. We mentioned a moment ago epimediums, and I see behind our cameraman an epimedium that might be too tall for a flowering lawn, but certainly worth pointing out. This is Epimedium Rhizomatosum, indicating it has a rhizome of significance. It's one of those ones that blooms for an extended period of time. The inflorescence continues to elongate and more flowers open up. They look like a bunch of dangling spiders, sort of very charming effect. And I don't remember if this species is evergreen or not. I think it's evergreen. It has a lovely bright white underside to the leaves, almost white, sort of chalk gray. Nice spine tooth. So this is a spreading one which could be used to cover a big chunk of a flowering lawn in the shade. I suspect some of the tougher, some of the epimediums might tolerate sun just because their nature is so resilient. But they probably wouldn't look very pretty in sun. They definitely prefer shade. My goodness, and some of this has grown up through this shrub and gotten fairly tall. Early in our time together today, I pointed out this little thyme and thought it was Bressingham pink. I do think we have some Bressingham pink in here, but I see from the label that it's actually the same species, Thymus serpillum, pink chintz, and you see I'm sticking my finger in all the way to the ground. It's like, almost an inch tall, and it's probably already been blooming for 2 months, and will continue for quite a while longer. We see a happy little bumblebee visiting the flowers, so you can have a pollinator garden without having plants towering over your head. And I'm going to go pick this. Most people know what the flowers on ajuga look like, but here's a late blooming one. Ajuga is actually in the mint family, that very large family that can include salvias and lavender and thymes. Well, yeah, thyme's also in that family. And like most members of the family, deer tend to leave them alone. And we met Veronica Waterperry Blue. This is the white sport of it, white water. This is not the time of year to look at these Veronicas because they're really spring bloomers. Though again, the beautiful foliage. And this is yet another Veronica, and its name doesn't come immediately to mind, but it has little blue flowers. And a really odd little lobelia. Lobelia is cardinal flower. Well, that's the lobelia you probably know. And lobelia is named for a Frenchman whose name was L''Obel. But this is little Lobelia chinensis, meaning from China. And the flowers are not, well, they're structured sort of like cardinal flower. But this is its foliage. It's maybe 2 inches tall. It's a pretty vigorous spreader. You see it's weaving its way through the Delosperma here, the ice plant. And it's been, this is, I think it's second summer, maybe it's third. But lovely little tiny foliage. And I don't know what else to tell you about the flowering lawn. A lot of these things are evergreen. So this garden does not disappear in the winter. I always feel most successful if a garden has year-round interest. And this one does. And the little bulbs that are underplanting a lot of these things really don't impact the later display, the late spring and summer and fall display, because the little daffodils we grow, for instance, have very fine foliage. You wouldn't put full-size daffodils like, you know, your standard trumpets or poets or you know, any of the big daffodils, because that foliage would completely obliterate these low-growing plants. And a lot of the smallest bulbs you're not going to find at your average garden center, maybe a really good garden center, but they're mail-order sources selling. They're usually marketed as miniature daffodils, and some of them are only 3 to 4 or 5 or 6 inches tall in bloom, and a lot of them, like the hoop skirt daffodils and the little true jonquils, have thread-like leaves, so it's a very fine foliage that disappears quickly. I don't see them today because they're fall blooming, but a number of tiny alliums work really well in a flowering lawn. You know, our really only criteria is the ultimate height of a plant. And obviously in this section of the flowering lawn, it needs to be things that are sun tolerant and fairly drought tolerant. And when we get down in the shady area, obviously there have to be things that are happier with shade than sun. Are there any additional questions about the flowering lawn?
Well, I've opened up the chat for questions, Doug. Okay. We had one question, but Mark quickly answered it. So anyone else have any questions, please go ahead and ask them. Otherwise, Doug has gone from one end of the flowering lawn to the other, which means he is done unless there's more questions.
They're done blooming, but they're in here somewhere. There are some really low-growing dianthus. Some of those bloom for extended period of time. Almost anything you find that's real low-growing works well in the flowering lawn.
There was a question quite a while ago, and I was up and about and moving. What was the name of the grass again?
It's Eragrostis, which is Eragrostis, spectopoli, or spectopolis, I forget which, meaning spectacular. And I don't remember a common name for it. People sometimes confuse it with purple muley grass, Muhlenbergia, because it looks like that in bloom, but it's much, much earlier, and it's only about 1 foot tall in bloom.
Good, thank you. And Mark just said that was purple love grass.
That's right.
Yep.
Thank you, Mark.
There we go. So thank you, Mark, for being in the background, helping answer the questions and typing some plant names. And Carol has just asked, I'm laughing because Carol's, Alexander's helping me film, but she's said that she's managed to kill a lot of ice plant, and she's wondering if that's from lack of drainage.
Oh, absolutely. You'd kill them quickly with lack of drainage. Yeah. Yep. Now, having said that, there are plenty of ice plant Delospermas that are not suited to our climate. It's a really big genus, and nowadays there's so much hybridizing going on. If any of the ones that are in the flowering lawns have been really good performers, and we could put up a list of ones that have performed well. for us, but as I mentioned, there's 4 or 5 new cultivars on trial in the color trials this year. Some really delicious looking colors. Fire Spinner has been a really good one. There's one that we've had for years named Blut, B-L-U-T, which is German for blood. It's not a red color, it's sort of a darker version of that sort of fuchsia color of the Delosperma cooperi. But, try things and see if they do well, or see what does well here. I know there's others that I'm not pulling up to, my memory, I'm not recalling their names right away.
And the last question in the chat is Mike is asking if you can compare the use of water between a regular lawn and a flowering lawn.
Well, that's a very good question. It's going to vary depending on what plants you're choosing for the flowering lawn. Mm-hmm. Some of the plants we have in the shade part of the flowering lawn need more water than the thymes and the Phlox subulata and the Delospermas that are out here in the sunny area. But, to our benefit, it also works out that this is going downhill, so the plants that are in the shade also happen to be in a moister part of this area, partly because, though I'm not a landscape architect, I do know that water runs downhill. Mm-hmm. And also being in the shade, it doesn't dry out as quickly. This is in sun almost the entire day because the sun, shining in the morning and it's in sun pretty much all day, the sunny part of it. So if you were doing a flowering lawn of drought-tolerant things, it's going to take less water than certainly a fescue lawn. It would take maybe even less. Well, no, Bermuda and Zoysia are very drought-tolerant, so they'd probably be comparable to this.
And we do have a couple more questions.
Sure.
Jack and Mary were specifically wondering where to get the hybrid geraniums, but I think the question can be applied to any plant you've talked about today. And from what I've seen, most of these are available at garden centers. When I worked at one 20 years ago, a good number of these were available, and some of them are just more modern, and they're going to be available too.
Yeah, a lot of these are easy to find. I only see a couple selections of that hybrid geranium for sale. That one was Carmina. There's a white one, Biakova, that I've often been able to buy, and it's a really pretty one. If you got real serious about geraniums, there's a nursery in California with the not surprising name of Geraniaceae, the family of geraniums, and they probably have 12 different selections of that hybrid and hundreds of other geraniums. But a lot of these can be found, and a lot of these real low-growing plants are sold under a marketing name of steppables, little tiny things you could plant as a lawn alternative. Again, I don't think they're really tolerant of being stepped on all that much.
No. And Mark's already addressed this in an earlier comment, but Pam was wondering, do we ever mow or otherwise rejuvenate this garden by pruning things back?
Today, Tim and some of the interns, maybe most of the interns, finished deadheading the ajuga because the old flower stalks don't go away on their own. And so as they're turning brown, they're pretty unsightly. They would eventually disappear, but we had this wonderful audience of people here viewing the garden. There's some blue-eyed grass in here, Cicericium, and that doesn't clean itself. But most things don't need tidying up. Our only really big maintenance, and it's not a huge thing, is weeding it. Other than that, there aren't things that need to be cut back. Oh, we do eventually need to cut back the what Mark's lovegrass, purple lovegrass. Yep. Yeah, its inflorescence are pretty through the winter months, but come late winter, we cut it down.
And that takes care of the questions in the chat, Doug.
Okay.
So thank you so much for today's great
Sure.
presentation. Thanks for
Sure.
showing us the flowering lawn.
Okay.
And thank you to all those that showed up today and enjoyed the online programming. Hope you can spend the afternoon outside. It's a lovely day, and looks like tomorrow might be even better. Have a great week, everyone. And
Thank
see
you,
you next
everybody.
week for Taming Tall Perennials with Doug.
Okay.
That'll be Wednesday at 3.